Yeah, hi there. I'm Jason Howe, and I'm the chairman of Rotosound Music Strings that was started by my father in the 1950s. In fact, we have documentation here from around 1955, so that kind of is the point at which I think the company started. Although right back then it was called Top Strings. That was the first brand that my dad had, and he couldn't register that, so it became Rotop, from the Latin roto, which means round, and then it became Rotosound, which was round sound, which was to do with the bass strings. So yeah, I've been around the business all my life, and right from the late 60s, I've always kind of been immersed in it in one way or the other. So I think as I grew up, it wasn't till about I was 13, 14 that I sort of had any interest in playing any music. But my dad was a very good zither player, which is this instrument here, which is very difficult to play because you're not doing two things with your hands, but you're actually doing three things. You're forming chords with your left hand, and then you're picking the melody out with the thumb on your right hand, and then you're picking out the bass notes, which are these strings here, with these fingers. So you're coordinating three things. Guitarist has it relatively easy. They're just picking with their right hand and forming the chords and soloing with their left hand. So I was always around that, and then I started playing guitar when I was about 14, and my dad, he was quite good with all the technical stuff and music theory, which I found quite interesting, circular fifths and how chords are put together and all that stuff. Yeah, so as far as I can recollect, the company actually, originally was set up in my dad's shed in Belvedere when he was putting the first string machines together. And from there, it went on to a place called Rice's Yard in Bexley Heath. And I think his sister and his brother were working for him, so it was literally a very small family business. Then he moved to Blackfen, which is about 3 miles from Bexley Heath. And then I think it went back to Bexley Heath in the mid-1960s to Upland Road. And then in the early 70s, he had a factory built that was purpose built for the string company. And I remember playing with the bricks by the road as a kid up there. And then in the mid-80s, we moved to Sevenoaks, and my dad moved the factory here as well. We actually had two buildings here, this one and the one up the road. But in 95, we consolidated everything and got it all into one building, which is where we've been ever since. So in the early 80s, I left school and I ended up going to college, study engineering, because my dad said to me, well, go and learn how to make stuff because you'll never be beholden to anybody. If you want something, you'll just make it. And that kind of really was a great thing to do. So I spent 5 years doing mechanical and production engineering at West Kent College, which was pretty interesting, but I'd already spent a lot of time with my dad taking Bugatti engines out of cars and fiddling around with motorbikes stuff. So I'd kind of, I think I'd inherited that aptitude to do it. And then my dad died in the 1994, so in the mid-90s, and the company was in a pretty bad way at that time. So a lot of work needed doing, and he started designing these new string machines, which, when you looked at it on the surface, were going to be very productive machines, but they didn't quite work. There was bits that weren't running right with the machines. So I spent a good part of a year looking at the machines and then redesigning the bits in the machines that didn't work and getting them sorted. And once that happened, it was then kind of laid the base, as it were, for building the new machines to actually make the bass strings, which is what I did from 2000 to 2005. I spent like 5 years just focused on, in fact, I was doing a lot of music and playing with bands and stuff in the 90s, and when my dad died, I kind of gave all that up, and I didn't do any music for about 15 years because all I did was build machines, you know, which was kind of my rock and roll at the time. But when I look back on it, I think I'm not quite sure how I managed to stay so focused on doing it, because the project was a 3 to 5 year project really, to see it through, you know, to actually finish it off. And those machines have now been in production for like 20 years. So when my father started the business in the 50s and going into the early 60s, he was kind of getting involved in a business that was just about to really boom. You know, the guitar business was really taking off with all the American bands and then all the British bands that were coming along off the back of that. So there was a big requirement for strings, and I think the big requirement for bass strings. Bass players were kind of like, they were using their upright basses, and like one of the first things my dad did was, I remember he told me about a guy that come to him and said, look, I've just bought this new Fender bass and it's great, you know, but now I'm going to a gig and I'm taking my double bass to play these songs and my electric bass to play these songs. So my dad came up with a string that when you put it on the electric bass sounds like a double bass, and that's the black nylon bass string, which he developed in about 1962. And that string ended up being used by a lot of people, probably most notably this chap here. With the Beatles, Paul McCartney used the black nylon strings for the last 2 or 3 albums, Abbey Road, Let It Be. You can hear that sound on like the intro of Come Together. You know, that's the distinctive sound of the black nylon bass string. And then in the mid-60s, a similar thing happened with John Entwistle from The Who. John was trying to get this really bright, twangy sound, and I think he'd been using a Dan Electro at the time. And it was kind of like almost the sound he wanted, but the gauges weren't right. So my father and John sat down and they basically come up with the gauge of bass string, which is now the industry standard, which is 45, 65, 80, 105. And then after that, a lot of the bands that were coming along, like Led Zeppelin, I guess, and Pink Floyd, they all started using the product. And my dad did say that he kind of felt like he'd never done anything that clever, apart from the fact that all the most famous bands in the world were using his strings. So, you know, I think the first endorsement was with John Entwistle. And my dad said to John, do you mind if I put a picture in the back of the string pack with, you know, stating that you use Rotosound? And John said, yeah, that's okay, as long as you give me 100 sets of strings for my next tour of America. And the first endorsement was started. Maybe in the whole industry, I don't know, but it was a significant turning point. And actually, when you follow through the, you know, from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, you kind of, you get the guys like Entwistle influenced the guys like Geddy Lee, you know, Chris Squire, and then you got guys like Paul Gray from The Damned, were big fans of Entwistle, so they used the strings. And then Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses was a big fan of The Damned, so he used the strings. So it was kind of like this this history of all the different artists, all the different genres, but you had the consistency of the brand and the strings, which I think we have that up to date really. I mean, I'm not up on music much right now, but I mean probably the last band, Oasis, Franz Ferdinand, and there's some newer bands. In the 1960s, all the guitar strings were made of stainless steel. They weren't made of nickel. Nickel didn't come along to the, I think, late 70s or early 80s. So, you know, Hendrix and Pete Townsend and all these guys were using stainless steel strings. You know, first Pink Floyd album, I'm a big Syd Barrett fan. So, you know, those are the strings he would have used on there. And it was really only later on, you know, we had sets we were making for Brian May, Queen, which was stainless steel. We were making sets for Jeff Beck, it was stainless steel. And then it was probably, I'd have to get the old catalogues out, but I think it's like late 70s, early 80s that the nickel strings come in, and you had a lot of the other brands from the States were all making nickel strings. So the nickel thing kind of took over. But actually sonically, you know, if you're listening to the guitar, the stainless steel strings sound fantastic. You know, I think there's a good example of a guy that we were supplying called Big Jim Sullivan, who I think was on the James Bond theme. Dang, daddling, dang, 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 daddling, dang. That's stainless steel. My Uncle Ron told me that. They were our stainless steel guitar strings on that. So yeah, there's been, you know, that's something that not a lot of people are aware of, and just assume they've always been nickel. Yes, so a big market for us obviously is the UK. That's our domestic market, where we've been selling for a long time directly to the music shops here, so through our reps. But overseas we sell a lot in America and about 50 other countries around the world. And I think the export business kind of started when some of our endorsees were going out to the States, like John Entwistle. And, you know, people were going along to the shows and listening to the band and going, wow. You know, I have so many stories of people that say to me, like Martin Turner from Wishbone Ash, oh, well, the first set of Rotosound bass strings I used were the ones that John Entwistle gave me backstage in Torquay in 1968 or whatever. You know, but I think a lot of the promotion and marketing stuff come from the bands touring, certainly from the US point of view. Yeah, and today we even sell to, did a big order last year to Mongolia, which was, this is one of the original fuzz pedals from the 1960s, and I think this was, at that time, I think it's probably made by Solar Sound, I think, in Denmark Street, in Charing Cross Road. And again, it was because my dad was finding success with the strings that he probably thought, well, I'll put the name on other products. But we reintroduced the fuzz pedal in 2012, and we kind of filled the pipeline at that point. We sold a couple of thousand of them, and then it kind of died off. And a year or so ago, we kind of reignited that and brought back the fuzz pedal again. So, and then we've just recently done the Union Jack fuzz as well, which we're quite excited about getting out there. Talking about some of the bands I like, I was quite fortunate when I was a kid. My dad would bring home all these albums by various bands, you know, unheard of bands like Queen, ELO, The Jam, you know. I mean, these were albums that were sent to my dad, and my dad wasn't really a rock and roll guy. You know, he was Stefan Grappelli, Django Reinhardt, you know, and all that. You know, I kind of grew up, I didn't kind of hit the punk thing, but I was a bit too young for that. But I very quickly started discovering bands like The Who and The Who Sell Out, and the fact that there's a Rotosound jingle on The Who Sell Out just before I Can See for Miles. So that kind of fascinated me, and I got into loads of obscure bands in the 80s, late 70s, 80s. You know, I'm a big fan of, like, I guess, lo-fi kind of garage kind of stuff, and Reckless Eric was part of the Stiff Records roster, you know. And yeah, I remember I've still got one of my treasured 10-inch brown vinyl is my Reckless Eric Whole Wide World Reconnaissance Sherry. So it was great to be, you're not only in a business that you love and enjoy, but you also get into music that through the company, you know. Rotosound, I don't know if would have got into Reckless Eric or Nick Lowe and whatever, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that we were supplying them with strings. And you know, I remember after my dad died, you know, I'd always been into early Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett, and it kind of fascinated me for the art, not the technical stuff, but the art in the music. And when my dad died, I remember going through some cupboards and, oh, a picture of Jimi Hendrix. Didn't know we had one of those. Better use that, you know. Oh, hang on, there's a Pink Floyd. Blimey, that's Sid in that one. Oh, that must be Abbey Road when Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper. And there was all this stuff that kind of was fascinating for me. So when I started playing, I never thought I'd be a very good guitar player, but I started writing songs because that's something I seemed to be able to do and enjoyed that a lot, you know. Thought, well, I'll just get somebody else to play something if it's difficult, you know. But if I write the song, that's the kind of the foundation, you know, for the music. So yeah, in the last 5 years, I've got a band called The Next Agenda, and we've been playing locally, festivals and gigs, and we kind of, I tie that in a little bit with the fact that Rotosound sponsors some of those festivals, like Local and Live. We played that last weekend in Tunbridge Wells. It's a few thousand people, so it's quite a good gig. And we promote the brand as well, because, you know, being a local music company, if I'm out there playing the guitar, I guess it's a pretty good advert, you know, for the fact that we're kind of, we're not just corporate, you know, we're actually, everybody that works here is kind of into playing in whatever style or genre. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that you're actually out there playing and creating something, you know. So that's really important. And I just use Rotosound yellows. So, but no, I mean, I think it's a, you know, we promote local venues. We played at a venue last Friday night. They've got Rotosound banners up on the wall in the venue, a place called The Ship in Gillingham, which is a great local venue. And the good thing about where we are in Kent, there's a lot of promotion for original music. There's a lot of venues that play original music, you know. Local and Live is 3 days of live music, and it's all original. All the bands are original, which for me, that's my thing. I'm not really, you know, I wouldn't feel, if I do a cover version, I don't think I'd probably do it justice, you know. But if you do your own stuff, then people just judge it on what that is, you know. But so that's a lot of fun. I mean, my wife would say I probably spend too much time, you know.
Got your studio at home?
Yeah, and I've got a studio at home, which is, you know, I've been recording to Logic and digital stuff for 10 or 12 years. Got a few albums out on iTunes, and it all sounds fine. I mean, I'm proud of those albums, but the last year I've really got back into recording analog to tape, 8-track, and just having fun using a lot of the old gear. I've got a Watkins Copycat for my tape echo, and to me it's the whole process of that recording that it just feels better to me. And with the digital stuff, you've just got these endless choices, you know. Oh, what reverb? 5,000 reverbs. And all these plugins, in my opinion, they never sound as good as the stuff coming off the tape with a natural reverb or echo, you know. So that's good fun, the recording side of it, you know. And luckily I've got a friend here that's Dave Cherry, that's building the pedals, that he knows a lot about all the old analog recording stuff, so if I can't fix it, I just give it to him. Yeah, so other misspent youth tinkering with cars, because actually one of my jobs when I left school, I did go and work as a mechanic for about a year, until I realised that it's great fun working on cars in your spare time, but I don't want to do it as a job. I don't want to be taking BMW engines out, you know. I just want to work on, so I'm into old 60s, 50s and 60s Saabs, the 2-strokes and the V4s. I got 4 of those, which are great fun, and the old cars are really simple to work on, so you get a lot of pleasure out of that, you know. I guess it's trying to stay away from modern stuff, really. That's my overview. You know, old strings that were made to the specs, the 60s, old cars, and there's no good music after 1968. No, I'm only joking. But no, I think a lot of that stuff, it's the passion, you know, whether it's the cars or the music, it's just the passion of how stuff's created, I think. You know, I think these days we just have this overwhelming choice of everything, and it kind of distracts you from what you're trying to create if you're trying to do something. But yeah, the cars are a bit of fun as well. So the first string pack we have is top strings. This would have been the late 1950s, and some other products we made for Jim Burns. These are the guitar strings, but we used to make the Burns Bison black nylon strings. And then after top strings, it become Rotop. Yeah. And it tells you on the back here about them. Rotop strings are superior strings, each and every string being tested for correct harmonic sequence, approved by leading musicians for acoustic and electric durability. I'm already sold on that, you know. So, and then after that, the Rotosound brand, which the logo that my dad designed in the mid 1960s. So that was the famous string pack that you can see here by a certain Mr. Hendricks. That was the design. Oh, and there's my mate Sid and Roger Waters, Pink Floyd. Again, holding, I think, the bass pack, but that design. So that would have been, that actually I know was Abbey Road, when the Beatles were next door recording Sgt. Pepper. Yeah. And also this one here with John Entwistle. Somebody's written The Who on the back, just in case you're not sure. So it's not you, Jack, was it? No. So yes.
Got a question mark at the end.
Yeah, The Who.
Who?
The Who. Then after this design, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, was the swirling pack, which probably was around for like 10 years. Into the mid 70s, and then things went to sort of a day glow fluorescent pack design, late 70s, and this set here is I think it was going to be a Jeff Beck signature set. We don't really have a lot of info on it, but there's also a Brian May one, I think. This would be from the late 70s, early 80s. And then in 1994, 95, we went to the box packaging and the line. And that lasted to about 2009, when we went to this design, which was the whole range kind of took in that design for about 4 or 5 years, and then it went to this one, which is kind of current, but
It'd be worth explaining the advantages of that foil packaging.
Yeah, and of course what we did in 2014, we went from box packaging like this, which had 6 strings in 6 envelopes, paper envelopes, which basically weighed about 30 grams, and each string in an envelope. The envelopes contain moisture and end up tarnishing the strings. So what we did is we got rid of the envelopes and we went to a single foil pack where you've got a 3 grams worth of packaging. So for every 10 of those, it's the same weight when you're shipping the product. So we think this is the most lightweight kind of packaging out there in the industry, because the first thing a guitar player does when he takes a string out the envelope is throw it in the bin. So that paper envelope has been part of that process of buying the set for at least 5 seconds, I guess. So yeah, we went to 3 coloured ball ends, red, white, blue, which is easy to remember. And then we've just come out with marketing chap, Jack, has just redesigned, spent the last year really redesigning the packaging for the electric strings and the acoustic strings. So this is the new look Rotos, which are shipping now basically, and the JKs, which will be shipping towards the end of the year. We're very excited about that. So, and there we are, up to date. Yeah, after working in the business for more than 30 years, it's certainly an exciting time that we're heading into, growing and developing the brand and coming up with new ideas. So we're very sort of positive about the future.